Hello, I'm David Scranton, and thanks for watching, because today we're discussing the investing for income strategy and if it will work for you and your retirement. So today now it's time to bring in some guests. I want to bring in, of course, Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, a retirement income store in Melbourne, Florida. Jeff, it's great to talk with you as usual.
Great to see you, Dave.
Right. And we also want to bring in, Jeff, today's special guest, and that's Peter Schiff. He's the chief economist and global strategist of Euro-Pacific Capital, a division of Alliance Global Partners. Peter, thanks for being back with us on the Income Generation.
Oh, thanks for having me back on.
Peter, I've seen you in the airwaves a lot lately, and the last time you were on the show, you and I had a pretty spirited debate on the causes of inflation, but I think in retrospect, we were probably both right. But the next question is, we've got high inflation. We don't really know what the real numbers are, but in your estimation, do you think it's going to be more transitory, or are we in a permanent phase of accelerated inflation? Where do you think we're going?
Well, I'm certainly in the permanent camp. The forces that are underlying these trends are actually going to intensify. So as bad as inflation is in 2021, it's likely to get a lot worse in 2022, and then worse still in 2023. So we're going to be living with inflation for a long time in the United States, increasingly higher levels of inflation. And since the Fed is going to do nothing to put out the fire, in fact, everything the Fed does is going to make the fire burn hotter. Investors in particular need to dramatically change their investment strategies relative to what they have been in the past 10 or 20 years to deal with this new inflationary reality.
All right, those are great points, and that kind of leads us into the next question, Peter. We're getting a lot of questions from folks in the income generation, our viewers and listeners, that are saying, why don't I own gold in my portfolio right now? Because if we're going into an inflationary environment, and the paradox is gold isn't increasing, but inflation is. So can you shed some light on that?
Well, remember, gold is a reflection, too, of the expectations that investors have for inflation in the future. And so if most people think that the current inflation is transitory, they don't see a need to hedge it by buying gold. Also, when you have the Federal Reserve threatening to fight inflation by raising interest rates or tightening up on monetary policy, and the markets actually believe that threat, they are starting to be nervous about holding gold, because they believe that if the Fed were to follow through with that threat, it would be negative for gold prices. But the Fed is only bluffing. They have no intention or even a real ability to fight inflation in any politically acceptable manner, because the only way to do that would be to send the economy not only into a depression, but you'd crash the stock market, crash the bond market, crash the real estate market, and force the U.S. government to dramatically reduce government spending. I mean, it wouldn't be a question of, should we have this new stimulus plan? It would be, what prior programs are we going to eliminate or cut back because we can't afford them if the Fed is raising interest rates and no longer monetizing the debt? So I don't see that as an option. So I think once investors realize that inflation is not only here to stay, but that it's going to get much, much worse, and there's nothing the Fed is going to do about it, you're going to see a meteoric rise in the price of gold.
Okay, so if I were to play devil's advocate, I'd say a lot of the Western world is really not in a much better position than we are. So that brings up the question as to, how does this whole thing end? Normally when you start to get the printing of money and the creation of this inflation, as we've seen just recently, it does cause a crash of a currency if it's only in one country, but it's in other countries.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second, Dave. The money printing can't stop, and I'm sure Peter will agree with this, because now it's a doctored economy, but permanently doctored. I call it the Frankenstein economy. Peter, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, hey, look, it's like a drug addict. If you're addicted to drugs, you can't stop taking the drugs. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't quit. It just means that when you do quit, you're going to go through withdrawal. And we would have a massive economic financial withdrawal if the Fed took away the monetary heroin. but they're not going to do it because they have no stomach for the withdrawal. But your point about other countries having similar problems, that's not true when it comes to trade, because we're having trade deficits because the rest of the world is having surpluses. So the world doesn't have America's deficit problem. The world has a surplus with the United States. It's America that is living beyond its means. It's the rest of the world that is making that possible by producing the stuff that we can't. So the rest of the world has the capacity to produce, as evidenced by their enormous surpluses with the United States. So we've got this vulnerable service sector economy that is incapable of production. And so we depend on the rest of the world in ways that the rest of the world does not depend on the United States.
All right, Peter Schiff, it's been our pleasure, and thank you for joining us as usual here on The Income Generation.